This is part 2 of our Caring for the Caregivers program that Dr. Peyton and I will be doing today. We'll do a public service announcement with Samaritan Counseling Center. We are a group that's here at Holy Communion. We have 5 other sites located across Memphis. We do individual, couples, group therapy, etc., testing for kids and adults. So we do a wide variety of things. We also do a lot of pastoral work and as well as outreach programming such as what we're doing today. Last week we talked about kind of the basics of caregiving. I'm going to do a quick update for those who weren't here. We're just going to do a quick summation of that. And when we talk about caregiving, last week we kind of talked about the various ways caregiving presents itself. First off, we talked about what is caregiving. To each and every one of us, it's sort of a different concept because we're all tending to different types of caregiving. We're all taking care of whether it's our spouses or our parents or our children or our siblings, and the impact that has on us, as well as just the general sense of what kind of caregiving are we doing. Was this expected? Was this planned? Was this unexpected? Was it a traumatic type of process that we're now having to deal with, or was it an expected process? Is the progression of the individual that we're taking care of, is the problem a slow-moving problem, or is it a quick one? And how do we ourselves deal with that? We talked about sort of the emotional and physical toll it also takes on us. If we're taking care of someone, for example, at the hospital, that whole concept of driving and parking and walking the halls and taking care and then walking back down the halls to the parking lot is really it's an emotionally and physically exhausting process. If we're taking care of someone, say, at a retirement community such as Tresvant or the Parkview, we have this added piece of driving and parking and going in and taking care of people, but we also see a lot of other folks who are in that kind of last part of their life as well that we're exposed to, and that too can have an emotional impact on us. Another part that we talked about was one of the individuals here was having to fly to another place or drive to another place, and the impact that that has on us just physically and emotionally, dealing with going to the airports or driving 2 or 3 hours to take care of a loved one. We also talked about sort of the vicarious trauma that happens to us when we take care of someone else. If it's a traumatic sort of situation, we too are sort of experiencing that trauma secondhand. Collateral damage, as you might hear when we talk about other things. But we do experience that ourselves. What is our role in all this, and how do we respond to the emotional impact of all this on ourselves? And when we talk about caregiving, another aspect is who's helping us with this. Is our partner or spouse helping us deal with all this? Are they helping to manage all the other things going on in life? Are we on our own doing this for our parents or our siblings, an aunt or an uncle, our children, etc.? Do we have any help? Do we have friends that we can lean on? Do we have people within our group that we can sort of unload with? Do we have a church support system, a pastoral support system that helps us to sort of take care of ourselves and give us an outlet for what's going on with us? You know, and the other thing is when we talk about caregiving, how do we feel about the other people in the family? Are they available? Are they helping out? Are they not helping out? Are they somewhere far away, or are they here in town but they're not helping us? And the kind of emotion that may pull up in us, the reaction that might pull up in us. And so there's a lot going on when we're talking about caregiving. The other thing that I neglected to talk about last week, but it's a big part of caregiving, is for those of us who are taking care of animals. sometimes we overlook that impact of when we have aging animals that have been with us 10, 20 years, and what that does to us. It's very similar to caring for another loved one, because the reality is our animals love us unconditionally, maybe not so much the people we're taking care of in our families. And so that's another dynamic when we talk about caregiving and just sort of that emotional piece that's involved on top of the physical piece. One more part that I'd like to address is just the financial, medical, and insurance piece of it, the business piece of it. If anybody has ever taken care of anyone and had to deal, go ahead. Yeah, or why don't I do this? Can you hear me better? You want me to start all the way over? No, please. And we do want this to be an interactive kind of program today, so whenever you have questions or comments that you'd like to add, please do. This is just kind of a summation, and we'll address some of that in a second. But how many in this room have had to deal with hospitals and insurance companies or their financial advisor or the insurance? It's really a monstrous piece of it because it's business. It's money, it's bottom line, and bureaucracies and paperwork. And it's enough that you have to go out and take care of this person in a very difficult time. But then on top of it, you have to take care of the financial end of it. And insurance companies and hospitals aren't always the easiest entities to deal with. When they charge you $600 for an aspirin, or the insurance company says they'll pay for it, and then you later find out that they're not going to pay for it. And so I don't want to portray them as the bad guys, but it's just another dimension to all this that makes it complicated and draws on us emotionally. It can be very physically draining as well to be on the phone talking to someone and trying to explain yourself or repeating your story over and over and over to different customer service people or dealing with hospitals. Another facet, of course, that goes along with hospitals and insurance companies is physicians. It's hard to find out from physicians what's really going on. I mentioned last week that, I think I may have did I turn this off? Okay. For myself, when I was dealing with both my parents, where I really got my information about each of them and the timing and what was going on was the nurses, because I couldn't get any of the physicians to tell me anything. They would defer me to this person or that person or whatever. And just so that whole absence of what's going on is another big piece of caregiving. And fortunately, we do have the nurses who come and tell us it's time for you to begin making plans. And so that's another component. And so when we talk about caregiving, it's this very multifaceted thing that goes on for us. It's kind of like, you always see the iceberg and the Titanic, and this much is showing, and then below the surface, there's all of that going on. And so that's really where we're at with caregiving. And so what we hope to do today is to kind of talk about what it does to each person, as well as some ways of managing that trauma, some ways of dealing with what's it like, how do I take care of myself. When we talk about stress, stress is both external and internal. External stress is what's put upon us, and of course internal stress is what I have to do, what I want to do, what I feel obligated or responsible to do. So we kind of put this on ourselves, and so we have to be able to manage that stress as we go along, because if we don't, all of us in this room know that stress will eat us alive. And so it's really important to figure out, one, what's stressful for each of us, because it's different for all of us. What's stressful for you might not bother me, and vice versa. But we have to figure out, how do we deal with stress? How do we manage stress? What works for each of us in this room because everybody's going to be a little bit different in what works for them. And so being able to learn what do I need to do to take care of myself during this time amidst all the other responsibilities that we have is really important. Any thoughts about that? How do people take care of themselves when they're taking care of someone else? What? Not very well. What are some things that each of you do that to manage stress in your day-to-day life? Absolutely, and recognize the difference, as they say, because we have so little control. We may think we have more control, but we really don't. I swim most mornings. What do each of you do to manage stress? Absolutely. And they don't talk back. Right. What else? Absolutely. And I think it's not a natural thing for us. It's more like learning how to play the violin. You have to practice letting go. You have to do it repeatedly before it kind of takes hold or works. And so it's kind of like forgiveness. Forgiveness is one of those things we have to practice over and over and over before we're actually able to get there. What are some of the other things, though, that you do to manage yourself? Exercise, absolutely. Yeah. Gardening therapy. Or just mowing the yard sometimes. For me, sometimes that loud noise and the instant gratification of the yard looking better all of a sudden is nice as well. What about music? Anybody in here use music to manage stress? There's nothing like that for me. What else? TV, movies, friends, a glass of wine here and there, a drink here and there. All of that. Read, absolutely. Sleeping, sometimes it's nice just to turn everything off and sleep. Traveling, when you get a break, being able to go somewhere. So there are a lot of things that we can do to sort of deal with what it's doing to us as we go along. But I'll just move it to this. Well, I don't think this is any better either. So I'll just talk louder. How about that? This is what we had before microphones, and they're also going to see or maybe be the recipient of us not taking care of ourselves in the many ways that can manifest itself. You know, a lot of times when we're under a lot of stress, we get scratchy, we get more irritable. We may have physical problems, headaches, we may have backaches, shoulders, stiff. We may have digestive problems. Wherever you carry your stress, it's going to kind of pile up on you. But everybody else around you may see it, but you may get so used to it that you don't do anything about it. Well, we'll see. Anyway, I'm just going to set this aside and see if I can talk loud enough. And so I think it's really important because I think we also, when we are in the process of caregiving, I think it's really important that those people within our circle that we lean on, that we're able to tell them, you know, if you see me not taking care of myself, would you say something? Or would you help me out? Or if I bark at you, if I am a little irritable today, recognize that it may not be directed intentionally at you. It's all my other stuff that's coming out. But I think it's really important to manage the stress so it doesn't manage you. I think long term, each of us needs to watch out about stress just because of the physical problems that it can cause long term, from heart disease to the autoimmune disorders, etc. Other thoughts? Okay. We'll do the best we can. How many of you are in the process right now of caregiving? Wow. So, and as we said last week, it's very frequently a universal kind of task that we all have to deal with in our lives at one point or another. But everybody's so different in what it requires and how it affects us, because each of our personalities get involved, and so it affects us in so many different ways. What I'd like to do at this point, unless there's questions or comments we want to add, is turn it over to Dr. Pate to talk about traumatization and ways of managing that and dealing with it. Are there any thoughts or comments people would like to add here?
Well, and I think what's really lovely about your example, we started off last week and we spoke to, it's not just compassion fatigue, it's also compassion satisfaction. A lot of us are brought into caregiving because it does give us something as well. And your parents, for many decades of their life, were your caregivers. And so when we have that role shift where you're trying to take care of them, that can be very difficult to amend your identity and how you relate to that individual. So by giving them that avenue to consider, hey, this is actually helping me, continues for them that mindset that I'm still doing for my child, even if I can't care for them in the way that I did when they were growing up.
Well, and symbolically, that kind of a transition in roles is really challenging for most people because of the symbolism of, I need someone to take care of me, I don't think so, kind of thing. But now, the person receiving the care, what are they thinking when this role that they're assuming, is this mortality that we're talking about? Is this I'm having to give up all of my freedoms and independence, and I don't like someone taking care of me, and this and that, and fear, what is it? All these things are going on, as you said, with the person we're taking care of, and then it kind of bounces back onto us because now we are in that role kind of dealing with it. Let me turn this over to Dr. Pate.
All right, hopefully I can stay somewhat grounded here. Is everybody good with this mic? Yeah. So like Earl spoke to, we talked a lot about risk factors last week, and I kind of left y'all at a lull of going, okay, here's all the vulnerabilities that we have, but there are many things that we can do to promote those protective factors and look at, in the face of all the adversity that is involved with caregiving, how can I restore and renew myself to be able to provide for others as well as my own needs? And we'll see that the top one that we've got listed up there is just knowledge. The fact that all of y'all are here sitting speaks to the need and the desire to gain insight into the process and promote self-awareness of what can I do, because this is a taxing experience. And so many of the things that we're looking at, we also highlighted faith and spirituality, this community of people that come and gather on a weekly basis that you can connect with and reach out to, like Earl was speaking to, extend for others, but allow others to extend back to you so that you can recognize it's a reciprocal process.
Can everybody read this, by the way? Everybody see that well?
So, in thinking about moving towards self-care, Earl asked about some coping mechanisms and what you guys do to take care of yourselves, and in considering the different ways that we look at those means and methods of providing for ourselves. Self-care is not some things that we often identify as our coping tools. Oop, and it's So it's not necessarily our favorite comfort foods, our central barbecue, our Tops cheeseburgers, which are delicious, but not self-care. Vegging out in front of the television, going on shopping, who's guilty? We all are. We think of them in this way. And in the immediate, in the short term, they can provide and alleviate. But time and time again, when that credit card bill comes, when the weight starts to pile on, we recognize that long term they are not the protective coping mechanisms that we had hoped for them to be. So, there are some common myths about self-care, and I would say probably I work a lot with children, teenagers, and their families, and the first one that pops up there, I hear from parents consistently, I have to take care of them. I have to make sure their needs are met. And there is no way that mamas, daddies, grandparents, aunts, uncles can take care of others if they're not taking care of themselves. And so it's often something that we have to hold on to and sit with and resonate and think about, in what ways am I serving my children, my family, my partner, my loved one, if I'm not serving myself. And so it's finding that balance. Not finding the time. We live in a consistently hectic and chaotic world. I didn't really hear many folks, that we heard some reading, some getting out in the gardening. When it doesn't have to be, I'm spending 3 hours reading. I'm spending all weekend in the yard. 10 to 15 minutes of deep breathing, of meditation mindfulness, of quiet sitting outside on my porch with a warm cup of coffee and listening to the birds in the morning can be what I need to get through the day, to wind down at the end of the night after all of the hectic life stresses that have been thrown at me. Now I know I've been certainly guilty of the pizza, late night, whatnot, and I saw some smiles when it popped up. We've all been there in that way and experienced it. But again, the short term versus the accumulative aspects. So, y'all are going to get to see some of my notes, so you may hear me overlap in some of these. But self-care is eating that good, healthful food. Apologies to the donuts in the back this morning. Probably not going to do that for you. Drinking enough water. For every cup of coffee that I have, make sure I'm drinking a glass of water to balance out. Some coffee is good for us. There's some science there. But there's also things to keep in mind, that just that 2% dip, y'all see it's right there. Fatigue, headaches, many other physical symptoms that can exacerbate the psychological symptoms. And so it is a mind-body disconnect. Like I mentioned, 10 to 15 minutes of physical activity. Physical activity can be slowing down. And when my body is constantly wired, we spoke last week about the arousal symptoms, the avoidance, the kind of looking at how my body is reacting to the world around me. And so slowing down and taking that 10, 15 of stretching, of just simply, I'm stuck at a desk writing a lot of notes, working on the computer, but extending and moving your body in that way can connect in and help ground you back to day-to-day life. Sleep hygiene. Every single provider in your life has probably spoken to you at some point about your sleep, but it is something to be mindful of and pay attention to and look to ways that, how can I turn my phone off at the end of the day? How can I give myself, we were speaking before we started this morning, routine. If I get into the habit of providing that gift for myself, then I continue to give the gifts that I have to offer to others. And our emotional bank account, the world of work that we work in, is paying attention to the psychological and looking at how my emotions and my beliefs impact my actions and the way that I respond to and engage in life. And so if I'm doing consistent work to give back and put back into me, then I'm going to be fulfilled and I'm going to be full within, so that when others call for it from me, I can willingly and gleefully give and not begrudgingly look at and go, you're draining and you're asking and asking, but no one's ever putting back in for me. Has anybody ever had that experience? Oh yeah, you're all kind of nodding along with me like, yeah. So we spoke a little bit too, just thinking about things that get in the way of taking care of yourselves. What speaks out for you guys? What have you encountered in day-to-day life? Time.
So where do you find your time going if not for taking care of you? That have no concept of time, and their needs need to be met right here and immediately, and thank you, and more. So certainly time, but not just with the littles, right? Time can span across the age span for us. The guilt can be real in caregiving, because very often the ones that we're caring for, Earl spoke to the pets, they can't speak back to us and say, well, I'm sorry, but I had another accident. Our parents, our grandparents, our children who call for and ask for us to give and give, sometimes can speak to, but with elderly and aging populations, the mind may no longer be there. And so when we feel guilt or we are uncertain how to move forward and respond to their needs, they may not be able to articulate what those needs are. And so it starts to very much hold heavy in our hearts. I never knew how to begin, so I did not know what would help. Many of us, and I would imagine we heard a few of you speak to, when people have reached out and like, that's not what I want or need at all. And then the resentment builds even more, because how do you not know me? You're supposed to be my friend. You're supposed to be my partner, and you're asking if this is going to help? And so again, the guilt, but also the resentment comes through. And so one of the things that I think Earl mentioned as well is really spending perhaps some of that quiet time with myself, or explaining and processing through with others to say, here's what I need from you. When you brought this to me, it didn't fulfill what I had. But that other person in the dynamic assumes that they are offering, because they wouldn't have extended that to you. And so if it doesn't feel like what you need, if it's not providing that caregiving compassion that they're reaching out for, let them know. I would imagine that that's really effortful, and it's something, again, to be compassionate to yourself, you have to practice that on a consistent basis.
You also have to be able to ask for what you need, because
There is a beautiful exercise regimen that a father has learned and has patented and marketing it now with his toddlers. Very much so. Absolutely. Well, there's the physiological benefits of being active and moving, but there's the psychological. Your child, in that case, is relating to and interacting with and recognizing the reciprocal relationship that I have with this person who, again, it's not the quantity of the time that they're spending together, but it's the quality, and being able to be in that moment and engaging. I think very often, because we are so connected digitally in this world, we can pick up a phone and have access to so many, but there is so much more difference in the relationship. Even think about being on a phone versus FaceTiming with someone. For those of you who've had that experience of seeing the face and getting those social, nonverbal interaction cues of, being present in that moment with the child can be very, very restorative. So we've already touched on a number of these, but I think it's important that you have to give yourself that permission. And again, in order to be there for others, you have to be there for yourself, because no one is going to fill your needs unless you are, one, taking care of it on your own, or two, letting others know what you need from them. That third one's really tricky in this world. How many of us have looked at someone in our life, whether we're very close or detached to them, and said, man, they've got it together. How are they doing that? Because I know some of the circumstances of their life. And if that was thrown at me, I wouldn't be standing on my 2 feet. And yet that person is making it happen. Again, that judgment-free existence is something that takes practice and compassion. Any of us ever called out of a meeting, begged out of a dinner date with a friend, said, I just know it's going to be too hard, so I'm just not even going to go there? And the next time it came up, I felt that call, that urge to do it again. Those avoidant behaviors are cyclical. That if we look at it and say it's just too hard, I'm going to retreat, that gets burned into our minds and our bodies. And so it's too hard, I can't do it, I avoid it. And the next time it comes up, it's too hard, I can't do it, I avoid it. And then I learn that it's threatening and it's too scary and I'm never going to. Whereas most experiences, if I'm there and it's challenging, my body starts to calm down once I'm in that. It's not as threatening as I thought it was. It's not as scary as an experience. I got through it. Getting through it reinforces then I am capable. And the next time that challenge comes up again, I'm going to be able to walk into it and maybe have learned this is what I need in order to continue to engage in that situation. So again, routine, giving myself some time, looking for those small positives. There are so many things in our day-to-day life that we look for the challenge. We look for the negative. We seek out and say, that was really hard, that was tough. Coming home at the end of the day, when you speak to or reflect on, gosh, this went well. It's rarely that this went well. We often think about all the things that were struggles. And so many of the things that we need to look at and work on is, how do I celebrate even the small, you know what, gosh, I made it to work on time today. I said no to my boss when he asked me to hit that deadline. It's not possible. That's something that is a gift for myself. And so recognizing and picking up on the small minor victories can provide and bolster me up for when those challenges, because stress is a when experience and it's not an if. But how we respond to that stress is completely within. So I'll just give you guys a second to, again, everyone can read up here. I think it's just so powerful and important for caregivers to recognize. I just did that for a new yoga DVD. So it's just unrealistic. We do not, except with the exception of Jesus walking on the water, expect us to be able to walk through. Life is going to be the tide that keeps coming at us. So we mentioned them last week, and I just wanted to kind of give you all the heads up for folks who are not here as well. Earl and I chose this profession, and again, for us, compassion satisfaction, hopefully, is continuing to outbalance the compassion fatigue. But for those of us who maybe personally were brought into caregiving, whether it was by our own volition or circumstances that entangled us in the same way, it's important to assess and acknowledge and gain the knowledge about your quality of life. So there is just a free, and we can distribute if folks are interested in looking at my quality of life and considering what aspects do provide that satisfaction for me and what aspects are pulling me in and potentially exposing me to that burnout factor, that vicarious traumatization. And again, it's only going to identify, but that's the first step, is gaining the knowledge of these are the things that are hard for me right now. Here's what I need to put in that time and effort to work on to allow me to continue to fill in that role as a caregiver. So we've got some resources, and again, we can pass them along to you guys if you're interested. We probably will not have time today. There's a link to a really lovely TED Talk which I would imagine a lot of folks are in, about caregiving. And so it is something where we want to at least just put that language out for others about how do I provide for myself, because we know that life is going to be asking from us.
Why don't we open it up to thoughts, questions,
Right. Mm-hmm. Sure. And it's an effortful process. But I think, one of the things that's popping in my mind for me, and I know someone over here spoke to the boundaries and recognizing they may be pushing beyond what your partner is capable of providing. And so when we see that personal, physical space, a boundary, or mentally, emotional boundary being pushed and intruded upon, it can be the call to say, I'm going to sit you back. I'm going to put you back in the bullpen. I'm going to pinch hit for you on this one. And allowing those people in our life to say, I'm just as capable and I want to give this for you. So it's kind of a parallel process of caregiving.
and being able, the two of you, to talk about it, as well as maybe having a conversation with them that I hope you'll be comfortable enough in asking me to help on some of these things.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Right.
It's kind of like needing to have a conference call with everybody to delegate, to divvy things up.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Mm-hmm. Right. Mm-hmm. Very much so. Mm-hmm.
I think
Well, I'd say, and you bring up, there's this lovely philosophy from improvisational comedy, honestly, that's yes and. That in order to keep the bit going, you don't say no, because it shuts it down right away. But it relates so much to caregiving as well, that if we're thinking, your children can throw the most off-the-wall thing to you, and you're like, yes, that's an idea, and we'll keep going and we'll talk, because you may not like the solution that the kid or the child or the parent is coming to you with, but they've got a pretty legitimate concern, whatever that they're bringing up to you. And so by saying yes and holding that, you've got a perspective, you're trying to give me something, people generally don't offer unless they're choosing to, unless it's a teenager and their parents are making them and they're begrudgingly saying, yes, here you go. But kind of practicing yes and in my life can be really a mind set shift that takes work, again, but can open up so many opportunities.
I think sometimes, too, the little things that others can do for us, whether it's picking something up at the grocery store bringing this by, doing that, etc., cooking a meal. Those are all these little things that can help that whole load that we're carrying. And our friends generally want to be able to help us. They don't know how, or maybe they don't know what to say. But these little kind of things that we may be reluctant to ask for, maybe that's one of the things we work on within ourselves to say, it would really help me today if you could go by the cleaners on the way home. Or it would really help me today if you could do this, that, or whatever.
Yes. So much so. I'd say, and you bring up, I mean, there's an entire world of therapy called narrative therapy. It's telling your story and speaking to your experience. And it's not a fact-finding mission by any case. It is what is my perception of my experiences? And that can be rich and joyful, kind of out there. But it tells you a lot about that person. It can just the process of engaging and connecting with someone. We are human. We are social creatures. We have this gift of communication that makes us who we are, and that is to interact. And so in what ways we choose to use that, again, it doesn't have to be factual, but what my experience and what my perception of processing that and giving that to someone else can be so fulfilling. Absolutely. I mean, we spoke to it. It can be 10, 15 minutes, and that can be enough. That can be your daily dose of medicine. You know, I talk a lot about it with caregivers. Give your child that 10 minutes where you are present and you are not on your phone and not thinking about what my grocery list is going to be and planning for that meeting tomorrow morning with the funders, because if I don't get that, then we're going to go bankrupt. Being there and being in that 10 minutes can be a daily dose of medicine for that child. Because they eat every day without you when they're, yes. Yes. Mm-hmm. Very much so.
Sounds like a conversation needs to be had with that brother. Uh-huh.
Sure. Absolutely.
You may have to say, repeat after me.
Absolutely. I'd say, because I think, you know, more than anything, caregiving can be a gift. And if we can walk away from even the most challenging interactive experience of that and say how grateful I am that I can provide, but also recognize that part of that providing is giving to myself so that I can continue to do that. So I think we're almost at our time, but any other thoughts, questions, reflections?